States and Europe. And we have another panelist, but let me make sure we are recording this. Jeff,
Yes,
are you
it's
recording?
I just hit record, Maurice.
Okay, great. So thank you, everyone. I will introduce all the panelists, but I will also introduce Cassandra Tyndall, who is not present with us. She the OPA live panel, but because she lives in Australia, which is about 2 a.m. in the morning right now, she has sent a recording, which we will send along with the recording of this session. So make sure when you receive the recording of this session to also listen to her presentation on a separate video. So we have a truly exciting year ahead of us. 2019 begins with a Sun-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn with Mars at 0 degrees Aries. I will show the chart a bit later on. And with many, planets in their own sign, in their domicile. So a lot to talk about. And I think many of you have also mentioned that this is a lead up to the year 2020, where there are very important cycles, namely the Pluto-Saturn cycle and the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And it's very exciting also to hear different perspectives, essentially from Melanie Reinhart, who will also introduce us to Chariklo, another centaur, the wife of Chiron, and that particular body, that particular centaur will be conjunct Pluto in the course of 2019. So I don't know if many of you are familiar with the influence of Chariklo, but we are delighted to expand our horizon and learn more about this. So we'll begin with Rick Levine, who will share his insight. Rick is obviously a very well-known astrologer. He's been with OPA for many years and is one of the founder of Star IQ website. And Rick is based in Washington State. Are you in Washington now, Rick?
I am. Well, actually, I'm in Oregon, but I'm close to home.
Wonderful. So I'll just share the chart before we begin with you, so we have an idea. Can you all see the chart?
Not yet.
Not yet.
It says, yep, there it is.
Yep.
Okay, great. It's the 1st of January. It's a solar chart, so the sun's on the ascendant. I didn't put Chariklo because I don't know yet how to include it, but Melanie will help us with that. So as I mentioned, the sun will be conjunct Saturn for the new year. The nodes are in Cancer, Capricorn, with the North Node in Cancer, and the moon ruling the North Node is in Scorpio, approaching a conjunction to Venus, which is always beautiful to see in the sky. And Mars, angular at 0 Aries, and that's for Washington, D.C. So it depends where you are in the world. Some people may begin the new year with Mars at 29 Pisces, while others will begin with Mars at 0 Aries, transitioning exactly during that time. So I'll pass the mic to you, Rick. Let's begin as we have a late start. I'll stop sharing, and I don't know if you have slides to share.
Yeah, I have a few. Okay, let's get this. Okay, so I just want to make sure. And you'll tell me when my time is up or close, Maurice?
I will.
It's 10:13. And I will try to keep this concise because there is a lot of material to cover. And there's a lot of ways that we can slice and dice looking ahead at a new year. And as Maurice said, one of the magical things about astrology is that the universe is holographic in as much as wherever we look, we can get a fuzzy picture of the whole. And so there are many places to look. And I kind of tried to take an overview of what I consider to be the major planetary cycles, looking ahead at the year. And every year has its own flavor. And I find that looking forward to 2019, the flavor is Jupiterian with a Saturn thump at the end. Okay, maybe it's a Saturn whack or a Saturn smack over the head. But that is the Saturn-Pluto, Chariklo, Jupiter confluence that we have in January of 2020. And as I often say, when we see a client, often the most important thing that's going on in their chart the year ahead is something that happened the previous year or the following year. It doesn't always fall in the year, and I would hold on to the position that the most important thing that happens in 2019 doesn't happen until January of 2020. So that I think other people will talk about in other degrees. I'm going to share my screen and just jump into some of this material here. And I think I can do this. Does that show?
Just come in, Frank. There you go.
And so what I'm looking at as 2019 as one of the keywords is it's dreams of excess. We have Jupiter all over the place for most of the year. It may be enough to say that Jupiter is in his domicile in Sagittarius for almost all of the year. Of course, it ends with Jupiter going into Capricorn, which is preparing us for that Saturn thump that happens toward the end of 2019 and into 2020. I want to start off and just spend maybe 5 minutes just taking a quick romp through the outer planets. And why isn't my screen changing? There it goes. And so I want to start off just with a couple of quick slides on Jupiter. Most of us already know that Jupiter is considered to be the cosmic good guy, that Plato wrote that excess generally causes a reaction. And here we have the interesting play between Jupiter and Saturn. There can't be light without dark. There can't be Jupiter without Saturn. And so what happens often is after a Jupiter process, Saturn comes in for the crunch. Jupiter is the king of the gods, Optimus Maximus, the most powerful, most big, most greatest, if you will. And Jupiter is associated with the keywords. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is stuff that we pretty much know, but I'm just trying to set the framework for this year of Jupiter, the planet that has to do with expansion, magnification, amplification, big ideas, beliefs, good fortune. And of course, it's important to understand that with the advent of the discovery of Neptune, Jupiter has been, like many of the classical planets, lost a part of his mythology, like Mars lost some wetness and passion to Pluto taking over Scorpio, if you will, and Saturn, the same with Aquarius, that Jupiter has kind of become a little bit more fiery and cooler, meaning that it's not as wet, it's not as emotional as perhaps it was when it was connected to Pisces also. So like I said, this is just going to be a really quick just run through of the outer planets. I've skipped Saturn here for a reason. Uranus, I always say that Uranus only has one job, and that's the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites. Think of lightning striking and for a moment taking the charges that couldn't resolve and going kapow and resolving them. Uranus is the weird planet. It's the quantum planet that crosses the boundary between fate and free will. And of course, the classic astrological line is, how do you predict the unpredictable? Because when Uranus is around, it usually is unpredictable, and we say it's unpredictable, and therefore we say we predicted it. Go figure. The thing with Uranus, though, is that there has to be tension. If there's no tension, Uranus has nowhere to bite into. It has nothing to release. The most important thing about Uranus and Taurus, and this obviously any one of us panelists could do an hour or so on Uranus and Taurus, and we're going to get some of the flavor of this through 2019. But the important thing to understand is that Uranus was in Aries. Even when Uranus is in Pisces, the changes happened relatively easily and regularly because emotions, water, and fire, intuition is more movable than Earth. And so Earth in Taurus, Uranus basically is going to build to stronger breakthroughs. It's like we need to get hit over our head in order to get the enlightenment rather than just getting it through awareness. And I think most people who have been talking about Uranus and Taurus agree that we're going to get Uranus and Taurus over the head hard with some very basic issues, like food supply, like poisoning of the food supply. Think, glyphosates and Monsanto. With the money supply, think the whole cryptocurrency thing going on. With water, who owns water? Think Nestle's. I mean, these are just a few of the things that come up. But Uranus and Taurus is going to be, basic weather, climate, and basic issues. When we get to Neptune, it's like we take a step outside. And my line on Neptune is simply Jupiter freed from the restraint of Saturn. Jupiter is about expansion, but it's like a balloon blowing up. It can only go so far until it pops. And it pops when it breaks through the boundary of Saturn. However, Neptune doesn't have that resistance. So Neptune has no connection to reality in as much as it's freed to continue dreaming and imagining as far as it wants to. I think of the Neptunian song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, there's a land that I once heard of in a lullaby. And then Pluto, metamorphosis. Pluto is change. I think of how much change can happen when a tsunami comes in and kills 500,000 people in an hour or so by the tsunami that washes over an island. And that's terrible and powerful. But compare that to a glacier that may take a century, but it can take down an entire forest or a mountain even. And so I think of plutonic changes as kind of surfing on a tsunami in slow motion. Instead of having to adjust every microsecond to keep our surfboard going, Pluto moves so slowly that sometimes it's hard to even remember that we're moving, but it is, and Pluto is here at the end of this little run. Now, I skipped Saturn in this little run of planets only because Saturn is so basic and so important, and we could, again, talk for hours about Saturn, but Saturn is the gatekeeper. Saturn is the thing that makes all the outer planets real. We're basically looked at Jupiter pushing up toward Saturn, and then once you're outside Saturn, you're in transpersonal and open realms. Well, the key to next year really begins with Jupiter's dance through the year. And I want to do this, really quickly. We don't have much time. The article that I wrote for the OPA publication has a little bit more detail in this. But we begin with a dance that's with us for most of the year, and that's Jupiter's sesquisquare. That's a square and a half, if you will, to Uranus. That is exact on January 10th, followed by Jupiter's square to Neptune just a few days later on January 14th. This little dance between Jupiter and Uranus and Jupiter and Neptune really become one of the backdrops of the year, because Jupiter sesquisquare to Uranus basically opens the door suddenly, and we're hopeful. Jupiter and Uranus have something in common, and that is that they're both in their own ways expansive. Jupiter does it gradually up to Saturn. Uranus does it like lightning, breaking down the walls of Saturn. And then Neptune takes it to the infinite, dimension. But we have the tension here of having a breakthrough followed by the disillusionment or followed by the belief. It can work in either way, either the disillusionment that the breakthrough wasn't what we had hoped, or the belief that it can work forever. I mean, Neptune works in both ways. It can both be enlightening and disappointing. So this is the first setup of the Jupiter to Uranus and Neptune. The second one, because of retrogrades, actually happens in the same order. And again, Jupiter sesqui-squares Uranus on June 7th, followed by its square to Neptune on June 16th. And again, we have the same order of the breakthrough of awareness, and then the kind of dance around what is real, what is true. The third and final time this happens, the order is reversed, and we get the square, the delusion first, followed by the breakthrough. And this is on September 21st is the square. There's a greater distance because of the movement here. The sesqui-square actually doesn't occur until October 14th. Now, the key to all of this tension between breakthrough and then dream, or dream then breakthrough, is resolved by the end of the year when Jupiter moves into Capricorn and Jupiter forms an Earth trine from Capricorn to Uranus. And here we can take it a step further. We can see, as far as we want, and yet there's a little bit of a dilemma here because this is the setup for the expansion that is followed by the Saturn-Pluto hammer that we'll get in just a moment. Two other quick things. One is that we've all talked a lot about the Uranus-Pluto squares from 2012 to 2015. But Uranus and Pluto now have opened up to 101 degrees plus, and that's a biseptile. And there's 7 biseptiles between Uranus and Pluto, just like there were 7 squares from 2012 to 2015. The first one was this past summer. The last one will be April 12th in 2021. But in 2019, on June 17th, which is also tying into the Jupiter stuff, and on November 14th, we get a Uranus biseptile Pluto. And here, what Dane Rudhyar said, the septiles basically were the aspect of fate. And later, when we get, in a minute or two, when we get to the World Trade Tower bombing, we'll see how not only was there a Saturn-Pluto involved, but also the septiles were incredibly active. And I think this background of the Uranus-Pluto biseptiles through 2019 really set us up for stuff that's bigger than it looks like on the surface. One last important thing is that another theme that's with us all through the year is Saturn forming a sextile with Neptune. The end of January is the first one. The middle of June is the second one on the retrogrades. And then the third and final one is in November. This gives the entire year a background of doing this dance between the imagination and reality. William Blake wrote, "What is now proved was once only imagined." And I think, or Caroline Casey says that imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. And I think here the Saturn-Neptune sextile dance throughout the year makes those dreams and those hopes maybe a little more important, because it's really, again, setting down the tracks for this appointment with destiny. And this appointment with destiny is set up by an ongoing dance of the Saturn-Pluto conjunctions and oppositions, which, if we do a 2,000-year sweep, includes, the Moorish invasion of Spain and Spain kicking the Moors out. It includes Muhammad taking Mecca. It includes the opening shots of World War I. And again, this is a lecture. We could go through these. These events are amazing. And of course, this chart, we all know the Mercury trine Saturn, Mercury rising at the moment of the bombing. But what most of us don't realize, these purple lines are the septiles, biseptiles, and triseptiles of that moment. And again, I'm only putting this up here to show that whether we use them in our regular practice or not, that septiles are incredibly powerful when it comes to stuff crashing through from the other side, with way more importance than it seems like it should have in that particular moment. And I'm doing this just to emphasize the Uranus-Pluto biseptiles of 2019. And so obviously all this is leading to what I call our appointment with destiny. I've said that since Saturn moved into Capricorn in December of 2018, Saturn's only had one thing on his or her mind, and that is the appointment with the big guy. Now, obviously, Melanie's going to blow our minds because the big guy's got company, apparently. But the fact of the matter is that when we look at these slow-moving transits, they're not about what happens that date, because those dates often have triggers both before and after, and they open up doors or windows that sometimes can create events from as long as a year before to a year after. So I would suggest that even though we're aiming this conjunction at early January, early mid-January 2020, the fact of the matter is that this is cooking all through 2019. And the events that we see, remember, Saturn-Pluto never really issues surprises. Okay, the World Trade Tower bombing was a surprise. But the fact of the matter is that you could almost follow the trajectory and come to the conclusions that Saturn and Pluto together create. And so I think that all through this year, we have a year to get it right. We have a year to do the work. Now, whether we do or what we do is a total separate issue. But I think that everything that we're doing in 2019 is aiming toward 2020, even though some of the major events may actually go down in 2019. That's my opening sentence.
Thank you, Rick. And
let me unshare my screen.
Many of us have indeed been looking at the chart for January 2020 when Pluto and Saturn will meet,
and Mercury and the Sun, and Jupiter's on its way. Yeah.
And Ceres.
Is
actually right on the same degree, 22 degrees Capricorn.
And
now, my question is, we know that Pluto, Saturn are already hovering over those degrees, 22 Capricorn this year.
Yes.
And it's very interesting that this year, on the one hand, has that incredibly expansive quality of Jupiter in Sag and Neptune in Pisces, which are both, transcendental, moving beyond the physical. You call them the dreamer, or, spiritual initiations and realization. And then we have something, this very practical and even shadow work with such a strong collection of planets in Capricorn, especially Pluto and Saturn in its own sign. So how do you reconcile those very different energy happening simultaneously?
I don't know if I can fully resolve it, but it brings to mind something that I've heard amongst Buddhist friend circles, and that is something they refer to as the tyranny of hope. that we think of Jupiter and Neptune as this kind of imagination and dreams and expansion and extension into the future, and the faith of Pisces and the hope that it'll be okay. And hope and faith are such powerfully, wonderfully good things in times of despair, but they take us away from the present moment. And so they become their own form of tyranny because they encourage in some way inaction in the present moment because we're hoping things will be better. And I think that there's a danger here in the Jupiter stuff, because whether it's in elections or in people on the streets or whatever, I mean, we live in crazy political times and we don't even need to go there. But the fact of the matter is that it may be easy during 2019 to be hopeful that things are going to be okay. And there may be some illusion tied up in that then when the Saturn-Pluto hammer comes down, we go, oh shit, we didn't get it right.
So
I think of Ram Dass saying that the great American or the great Western death mantra is, oh shit. We don't prepare for the ending very well.
You see the Neptune-Jupiter mostly as deceptive. What would be a positive?
No, I don't. No, the positive is the dreams and imagination are the scaffolding upon which we build reality. No, I don't see them as only bad. I think that the use of the dream and the use of the hope and the use of all of that allows us to actually create a vision, but then we have to do the work in order to realize the vision. Making it happen in our head is not enough.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. I'm just going to share very quickly the two charts. If we look at the square between Jupiter and Neptune. I'm going to share when the cycle actually began was in 2009. The conjunction of Jupiter-Neptune began this previous cycle in May 2009. It was after the big economic crisis and crash of 2008. And a lot of new development happened during that time. So we are still in this cycle with now the last square, which will lead to the next conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune in 2022 at 23 degrees Pisces. So we're now closing the 2009 cycle and beginning and basically ahead of the 2022 cycle, when the conjunction will happen in Pisces, and they're both traditional and modern ruler of Pisces, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
So wonderful.
And there's this whole thing of fake news, of what we've gone through, some sort of gate as to what reality actually is, where imagination and dreams appear to be real. And so I think that this is part of that whole Neptune and Pisces and the Jupiter cycle that we're kind of dealing with this.
Well, it's an adventure. I think the Jupiter and Neptune definitely, open a lot of a need to risk, try new things. And like you say, maybe it's about time to bring those ideas into matter, into practical application. And those of us who will manage to bridge between the abstract world, the theoretical, the spiritual, and bring that down into the physical, may perhaps, excuse me, sail through these tumultuous currents more gracefully.
Best blessings. Maybe.
Thank you so much, Rick. And Angela is our second Aries, beginning Aries moon session.
There's no such thing as a second Aries. We're both first Aries.
Yes.
I was born a little bit later, April 14. You are 13, I think.
I'm the 6th. But Angela, I say no self-respecting Aries would wait until April to be born.
So it's an Aries moon, and here we have the feminine representative. Thank you, Angela, who is our OPA representative in Greece. Angela has a very successful career as an astrologer in Greece, has done tremendous research, which we are always very excited to hear. And even for this particular cycle, she's done some research that will also be published in our magazine, The Career Astrologer, coming out on the solstice, God willing. Mars in Pisces willing. So, Angela, thank you. Let us know what the Greek oracle has to say.
Yes, okay, let me share also my screen. It's all Greek to you, I know. Okay, that's it. So this is a really rare occurrence, let's say. So when on November 8th, Jupiter entered the sign of Sagittarius, he became the third outer planet currently transiting in the sign of his rulership. So from this date and until December the 2nd of 2019, Jupiter's, Saturn's, and Neptune's energies become powerful and domineering. So this exceptional occurrence is undoubtedly rare. Neptune takes a long time to complete the full cycle. It's about 164 years, with an average of 13.7 years per sign, and thus giving enough time to Jupiter to complete his own cycle. So having Neptune in Pisces and Jupiter in Sagittarius is very common. On the other hand, the 30-year cycle of Saturn lessens the chances of a simultaneous transit of Saturn in Capricorn and Neptune in Pisces, and it actually happens approximately every 324 years, which is every second time Neptune is in Pisces. So we can understand that the odds to have all three planets together are very rare. Nevertheless, I have found that approximately 1,469 years ago, and then same again ago, once Jupiter entered in the sign of Sagittarius, Saturn was in Capricorn, Neptune was in Pisces, and also, you're not going to believe it, Pluto was in Capricorn, and the nodes were, the North Node was in Cancer and South Node in Capricorn. So exactly the same as current times. And this happened in 923 BC and in 548 after death, AD. So, of course, this is very distant past. All that we know from the historians that this was the year that the founder of the 22nd dynasty in Egypt, who has had very expansive territorial claims, he died, and he was succeeded by his son, who started a long and prosperous period in Egypt's history. On the other hand, for this cycle, we had the beginning of the third and the last siege of Rome by the Ostrogoths, and also we had the third phase of the war between Byzantine and the Persian empires, fighting for the access to the Black Sea. So Neptune, you see here, has to do with the Black Sea, that they wanted to have this access. So in the second case, we're in the heart of the Piscean era. So it was, we think, the period of great migration. Neptune was there, but not yet discovered. And in traditional astrology, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. So for the record, although Neptune was observed by Galileo in 1613, while being in conjunction to Jupiter in Virgo, it wasn't until 1846 that he was recognized as a planet by Gillett. And in today's period, we're in the limits of Pisces and Aquarius. So it seems like we are closer to understanding. But are we? You probably remember the OPA broadcast with Maurice we had in Boaz when we talked about the new cycle of Jupiter in Sagittarius, the earliest degrees since the last 83 years. This states that we are in a period of early conditions, giving us the opportunity to redefine our lives, our values, our ideas, and our society as a whole. Let's take it as a tabula rasa moment. Jupiter.
Just one quick question,
Yes.
Angela. What you're basically saying is that the last time Saturn was in Capricorn, Neptune in Pisces, and Jupiter in Sagittarius was 1,470 years ago, roughly.
Yes, two times.
And that also happened to be when Pluto was in Capricorn and the nodes were in Capricorn. So there was also a Pluto-Saturn conjunction.
Yep.
And on the nodes. And that's quite amazing because we don't think about the recurrence of so many slow-moving planets. So 1,400 years on the one hand is very, it's a long time
far
ago,
away,
but not that long.
Exactly.
For all these planets to come together, even though it's not at the same degree.
Yes, and especially I didn't want to talk a lot about the last one that we had when I said about the Ostrogoths and the empire of the Byzantine Empire and the Persians. I said that it was the third siege and the third war with the Persians, which means that they kept on doing the same war again and again and again. At the end, nothing changed, nothing happened. The Europe changed only. They never won. They were insisting in things that they have repeated in the past.
So that year was the third year, was this third war.
The third, yes. For which Ostrogoths?
And you said that nothing emerged from that? There was no conclusion, or there was no change, but you say Europe changed.
They lost. Yes, of course, they lost because they were trying again and again. It was the third time that they did it. The Ostrogoths actually lost totally. And with the Persians, nothing happened. The Byzantines were still there. So at the end, they gave up. They lost only their power.
Who are the Ostrogoths today? What region of Europe do you know about?
No, they don't have. There are a few. They were all absorbed.
But
They
were
were
they, from what region were they originally?
from Europe. But then it was
No,
the
what part of
German,
Europe? Germany.
no,
French-German
German,
border.
yeah.
French-German
Okay.
border area.
Well, it would be interesting to see the current geopolitical map and, you know, the European Union going through this transit today.
Yes,
And
because as I mentioned, it was during the era of the Great Migration. You know, people were moving around. They were. It's like now, people
yeah,
are moving around. It's not just like Rick said. We don't take it, you know, right now. What's happening in the same year? It's like the seeds also.
yeah.
You see, yeah, the occurrences for later.
Okay, thank you.
So you're welcome. And so here we have the third one, and we had also Venus, which was in Libra. That's very important also. So let's say that Jupiter was the god of all the gods and mortals, of the earth and the sky, the seed to everything around us and within us. So all these myths regarding the affairs and the adventures of having, you know, with other goddesses and mortals are not romantic novels, actually, or it could be, but anyway, it's a way of showing the spirit that we have and the wisdom and the sacredness of the world we live in, and also the ability we have to liberate and attain higher understanding. So Jupiter, Zeus, was a third generation god who represents the modern and advanced era of humanity. We all know how his mother Rhea kept him safe from Kronos and raised by a mythical goat called Amalthea in a cave. So Zeus, Jupiter's early life, that's important what I want to say, begins with staying hidden. He's hidden until he's strong and sagacious enough to step out of the shadows. Jupiter, because we tend to have this optimism with Jupiter, I know, I understand, this is what pushes us. Actually, the god stayed hidden until he felt that he was physically and mentally, spiritually mature enough to go out and fight. He didn't go like that. Also, I want to say about, I also see a lot about the asteroids just to help me to see the myth, not for anything else. So at that moment when we had the Ingress chart, we had Amalthea, the asteroid 113 was 20th degree of Pluto. So which means that Pluto, again, here, it's connected and show us that we need to change and we need metamorphosis and we need to reborn in every state, socially and personally. Also, we know about Amalthea, which is the profusion and generosity. This is what it means. All the trends that was given to Jupiter was thanks to Amalthea. We know about the Horn of Plenty, which is also abundance, and Aegis, which is the protection. And once she was dead, Jupiter placed Amalthea in the constellation of the Charioteer, or Iga. Capella is associated with Amalthea 2151 degree of Gemini. I will show you why I'm talking about it later. So let's move to this chart, which is the 1935 vs the 2018, because we said that this was the Sun-Jupiter conjunction at the early degrees. So this we see here that we have a reverse chart completely, opposing exactly what we have right now. So I'm gonna say that 1936 on March, Hitler breaks Treaty of Versailles by sending troops to the Rhineland. So he breaks a promise, and this is how this is the beginning of, you know, all this political, you know, saying ideologies and everything that led to a war. This period led to war.
Let me reframe this so that we can all follow and perhaps make it clear. So you're going back to the time of 1935 when Jupiter was at 0 Sagittarius as well. So you are saying that ingress of Jupiter, this is the chart of the ingress of Jupiter in Sag in 35 and then the one in 2008.
Yes.
Because during both these years, the conjunction of Jupiter to the Sun was in the early degrees of Sagittarius, the seeding degrees.
Opening the cycle, yes.
And now you're looking at both charts of the ingress of Jupiter at 0 degrees Sagittarius, and we're seeing basically a lot of similarities with the same sun and Uranus very close to each other, and Pluto opposing, and the nodes reversed, and Neptune opposing. And so now, I understand when you're speaking about the ideologies that began in 1935 and fueled war soon after.
Exactly. This is an ideological and, saying that we are the ones that are the victims. This is how they manage to persuade people, because you cannot believe how the Germans or the French or whoever followed. You don't understand how this has happened. So this is like believing, giving you hope, and so accepting it like this. This is also because the Jupiter, later with Neptune, the square, it's not easy. This is the promise that they give you, and it's very easy to believe it.
So you talk about false promises with Jupiter, Neptune.
Yes. Not being able to understand behind the messages.
Okay.
It's very easy to believe for that. So this is the past, and why I'm going through this, because I hate when politics say, forget about the past, because if we don't learn from it, we are doomed to repeat it. That's why I am going to the past and saying, yes. So we talked about this, you had the same discussion. So I believe very much whenever I see aspects, I go to the synodic cycles, where it began. So now we have the Jupiter-Neptune, we have the Saturn-Neptune sextile, but we have to see where it started. So the two brothers, which is Jupiter and Neptune, started their common journey in 2009. And the degrees were about 24 to 26 of Aquarius. This will last until April 22. You already said that. Okay, I will skip that. So Jupiter-Neptune creates a highly spiritual energy and mystical experience. And in the sign of Aquarius, it becomes even more altruistic, creating the need to sacrifice for a greater good for humanity. Aquarius, however, speaks for universal knowledge and awakening, and the need to leave personal inferior feelings and beliefs behind us. So in the ingress chart of Jupiter in Sagittarius, the point which is triggered, this point is triggered by Mars, which is in 25th degree of Aquarius. So in the ingress chart of Jupiter, Mars was in these degrees where Jupiter-Neptune conjunction happened. So I know the truth, I become the truth. So for Jupiter and Saturn, they have engaged in the past, okay, but now we are going to talk about Saturn-Neptune with the synodic cycle started in 1989 in the 10th degree, between the 10th degree and 11th degree of Capricorn. So in this cycle, Saturn was very strong. He was the strong one, and he gave the stigma for the need to dissolve the system of the authoritative principles and the name to renew the structures. Well, the problem is that Neptune gives, the hopes, and he's based more to emotions and lacks in practical application, only because we are far from the equivalent level of consciousness. So while Saturn builds, Neptune deconstructs. And while Saturn is rigid, cold, and rational, Neptune swims in, in the endless ocean of emotions and the self-sacrifice. So at the end, Neptune can hardly respond to the linear dimensional Saturn simply because he is multi-dimensional. What we had in 1989, we are, in the collective consciousness, we are linked to the fall of the Berlin Wall. So this was a liberation also. This was happening with the Soviet Union and the heroic perestroika of Gorbachev. And people, of course, they said that altogether it was a shame to have a wall in the heart of Europe. But when it fell, the promise was, you know what, we are all going to be okay. The thing is that the problem, if people from the eastern side of Germany, they had very big problems relating to practical matters or the economical, how they were going to be equal. So it created like something like big promises that could not be idealistic because there were a lot of difficulties. So for 2019, we have, of course, the dates. We have already spoken about the days that we have the Jupiter-Neptune square and the Saturn. So I see Saturn here as the moderator and the overseer, and he's just checking the behavior between Jupiter and Neptune. The thing is that when we are talking about Neptune and Saturn, it's like there is a connection between them, normal one, behind the scenes. So is it going to be like promising us that things are going to be okay while they're working, the authorities working behind the scenes, and they're showing us what we want to see? This is, you know, working together, those two, because they have started from Capricorn. Now it's the return of Saturn in his own place, but now Neptune is found himself also in his own sign. So these two are working together, and he's checking what's happening with Jupiter. What is Jupiter doing with Neptune? Okay, let me see if you're doing it well. Let him bring back to order. Okay, but okay, of course, Saturn's main principle is to build and to maintain the order by applying the law, both on spiritual and material dimensions, and the Lord of Karma gives what has to be given, rewards or punishes, according to our mental statement or how we see things. What's also very important to say is that during this year, we have all these three planets being on their domicile in their own placement, but there's going to be other personal planets transiting during this year in their own sign. So since this is very collective and very spiritual and very higher, let's say, not very easy to understand, those three planets, the personal ones are going to give direct a message. But when a planet is in its own position, the energy is so raw that it cannot be filtered. So it's going to be like hits. Depending on in which stage we are going to understand this. So as we said, during the year of 2019, Mars is going to be in Aries. So it's going to be like, this year, I'm going to change things. Now I'm going to take action. But since we've got the Sun and Saturn conjunction, it has to be in a way that we are mature, not going like this. So Mars is difficult here because it's going to trine Jupiter and be helpful to that, but at the same time, it's going to have squares to Saturn, while Jupiter is going to have a square to Neptune. So everything is going to be like trine squares. And the energy, very strong, and the reactions are going to be very strong. So I'm going to the next one.
So just to reiterate, what you're saying, going back to your previous slide,
yep,
is that we have three slow-moving planets in their own sign, Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune, but then the fast-moving planets are also going to visit their own sign, and it basically intensifies everything.
Yeah.
Mars
because
being
they are the channel. It's the channel to show the energy. But once they are in their own sign, it's raw. The energy goes very fast, moves very fast and unfiltered.
Okay.
So it gives also in an extreme way. Mars wants to do its own thing in Aries.
Yeah, understood. So Mars in Scorpio, we begin with Mars in Aries 2019, and we end with Mars in Scorpio. Interesting. Yes. So both very action-oriented, transformative, confrontational, and Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one last question. I mean, one more question, precisely. You spoke about the previous cycles in your previous slide between Jupiter, Neptune, and then Saturn, Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to show, if you don't mind unsharing, I'll share my screen. I just want to show the previous cycle
You
of
unshare.
Saturn. Yes,
Stop
of Saturn,
sharing.
Neptune.
Let me stop sharing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that. Doesn't work. Why? Doesn't want to stop staring? I liked it.
Here. So I just want to show everyone the chart of the previous Neptune-Saturn cycle. And this was, as you were saying, in 1989, the year of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dismantlement of the Soviet Union. And interestingly, as you were saying, we're having now a Saturn return to this period.
Yes.
Pretty much the same degree, 11 degree, is the start of the year for 2019. Saturn will be at 11 degrees Capricorn. And Neptune is going to be also sextiling that particular alignment this year, but it's going to be a closing square, a closing sextile, as Saturn is approaching a conjunction to Neptune. And I just want to show.
Sorry, you just said that this conjunction is like the year that it starts with Sun-Saturn conjunction.
Yeah, the current one, our year 2019 begins with Saturn at 11 degrees Capricorn, the same Saturn that was conjunct Neptune in 89.
Exactly.
So there may be a recurrence of some kind of dismantling and echoing what happened in 1989. Now, I want to just show what we're going towards. The next Saturn-Neptune conjunction will take place, in a few years from now. We still have about 7 years, but as each square between each sextile takes about 7 years to complete, but it's going to be at the 0 degrees Aries, which is quite dramatic for this next conjunction. So just keeping that in mind. So thank you. And if we look back at these cycles, what are we learning then for now? Like, how can we learn from the past, as you were saying?
How we learn from the past?
How should we? Like, what
should we learn? Okay, so I am taking you back to the allegory of the cave, and also for all the philosophers that they have spoken about cultivating the mind. Is learning how to understand, how to think, not what to think. It's very important to see it. We have to be members of this society and always questioning, not taking, the ready-made food, put it in the microwave oven, not asking what it is, just because we are occupied with something else. Okay, just don't bother me, do whatever you like. Oh, okay, it's like this. So people have to take responsibility of their own understanding, of their own self.
Understood. Thank you.
I thank you.
You were talking about Almathea. Almathea, who was the protector of Jupiter in the mythology.
Yes.
And she nourished Jupiter when he was in hiding.
Yeah.
And she's an asteroid that is now, can be placed in a chart, really. And where is she going to be in 2019?
No, she's moving more fast. She's moving fast.
Okay. So there's no tracking of her.
When it started, it was 20th degree of Capricorn, right on Pluto.
The beginning of 2019, she's at 20?
No, it was when Jupiter entered, because this is where Jupiter was born. So it's going to be a very, very also important date, which I can't show because I think I have exceeded the time.
It's okay. Just everyone, if you would like to do some more research about this asteroid and how it she relates to Jupiter, you can keep exploring that. So thank you so much,
I
Angela.
thank you. I thank you.
And I would like to introduce Melanie Reinhart. Hello, Melanie. I think you're muted. If you can unmute yourself. Wonderful.
Can you hear now?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And Melanie is joining us from the UK. And many of you may be familiar with Melanie's research on the centaurs, particularly Chiron. And she wrote probably one of the most important book on Chiron, but many other centaurs as well, which most of us, don't pay attention to, as if, we pay attention to Chiron, but we ignore the rest of the family. So this is an opportunity to learn more about the centaurs, and we welcome your perspective. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So I'll start my screen share right now. Okay. So as Maurice already mentioned, now my screen didn't change. Let me try that again. Yeah, here we go. As Maurice already mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on the 3 conjunctions coming up between Chariklo, who is the wife of Chiron in the mythology, and Pluto. Now, obviously, as Rick has already outlined, many of the things going on during 2019 have to be seen within the context of the fact that with Saturn in Capricorn, he's often the ruler of most of any chart that you care to draw up. And as Angela pointed out, there are also other planets in dignity. Both Pluto and also Chariklo are already in Capricorn, so Saturn is their dispositor or ruler. And in this context, I would understand Saturn as the lord of time and also the lord of manifestation. The energy of Saturn is towards making something real, towards something actually happening. And in that sense, very much a planet referring us to 3D reality. And that can be a very joyful process. And as we know, Saturn is also associated with difficulties. So without further ado, to move on to say a little bit about the centaurs, because they do have a kind of indigenous link with Pluto that to me is like poetry in the skies. So here's a picture showing a long shot of the solar system and the orbit of Pluto, this big ellipse here. Now, the figures on this always totally blow my mind, so I love to mention them. So that little bar there, that's 30 astronomical units. And 1 astronomical unit is 93 million miles. That's the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So this mass around the solar system is 200 of these 93 million miles. I mean, it's unbelievable. And we live in the middle of all of that. It's just so cool. So Pluto's orbit, that's the one that's 30 astronomical units from the Sun. And now, this is the so-called Kuiper belt, Kuiper. And out here are thousands upon thousands of small objects which are being discovered and named and numbered first and then named as we speak. And of all of those objects, there's a subcategory which eventually became called the centaurs. And again, more poetry in the sky. When Chiron was first discovered in 1977, they didn't really know what kind of object it was. It didn't quite behave like a planet. It was considered too small and not in the correct place where they might expect another planet. It got recategorized 3 or 4 times, and interestingly, it retained its category numbers. So some people call it an asteroid, some people call it a comet. Its original name was planetoid. And finally, this whole new category was created called the centaurs. So Chiron started out as a total anomaly, a maverick, someone that nobody knew what to make of, neither the astronomers nor us, the astrologers. And it's the state of play now is that there's a whole tribe of them out there. To date, now this next slide is a little bit out of date. That's JPL, is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who are partly responsible for the naming and numbering and naming of objects. And this is, I think, about a year ago I made this slide. So there'll be more. There'll probably be more than 400 centaurs now. And just to say, this matches so beautifully with the mythology, because in the mythology, there were basically 2 types of centaurs. One was the unnamed mob that would rampage through villages and steal wine and abduct brides and generally cause mayhem and chaos. And then there are individualized centaurs, individualized to varying degrees. In some cases, there's only one tiny anecdote which links them with a particular hero or god. But there's a few of them that have their own storyline and a kind of a developed characterology and a web of mythic associations and so on and so forth. And Chiron is now, centaur number 1. Now, Pluto inhabits this realm called the Kuiper Belt, from which it's thought that the centaurs originated. So the centaurs originated out here in the Kuiper Belt and were said to have been drawn in to the solar system by the gravitational pull of Neptune. More poetry in the skies, because I'm sure I'm not the only one here who understands the experience of being drawn into something by the gravitational pull of Neptune, i.e. my illusions and delusions and false hopes and all the rest of it. At the same time, we have, in the new definition of the solar system, since Pluto was so-called demoted, Neptune is now the outer edge of the solar system. So we could say, well, we're living in a solar system where the edge is now how we deal with our delusions and illusions and how we transmute that energy into something of the positive side of Neptune, which is about compassion and an empathic sense of belonging to the whole cosmos in a very direct way. So when we consider Pluto's place in this, it gets very interesting. These are quotes taken from some of the journals that announced the discovery of the Kuiper Belt. The pristine remains of the origins of the solar system. Oh, that's so beautiful. That flags up ancestral themes. I just mentioned that, and I'll say more about that shortly. So Pluto is, in the mythology, the lord of the underworld. He is now the king of the Kuiper Belt. It's still in dispute as to whether which is the biggest object out there in the Kuiper Belt. But Pluto, in a sense, is the original inhabitant of the ones we know about. So the Kuiper belt is like the extraterrestrial location, physically speaking and symbolically speaking, of the extraterrestrial underworld. There's a lot of similarities between Pluto and the Centaurs, astronomically. They have highly elliptical orbits, both. The orbits are steeply inclined to the ecliptic. And also Pluto is an orbit crosser. And until the discovery of Chiron and then the Centaurs, Pluto was the only one in our solar system that did this. And to my knowledge, Dane Rudyard was the only one to really pick up on that and work at the symbolism. So he spoke of Pluto as being, his exact word, very poetic, is the fecundator, to make fertile, coming into the solar system and then going out again. So bringing the intimations of the beyond. So here, Chariclo, who is our focus now, is the exception to this. She doesn't actually cross over any other orbits. And then there's the Kuiper belt connection. So Pluto inhabits the Kuiper belt, and the Centaurs were said to have originated there. So the Centaurs then, and this applies to all the Centaurs that I've studied in any depth, which isn't a whole lot considering how many they are, but enough to really feel a coherence with this group. And each individual one has their own story and their own nuance as to how they do this. But they are like the messengers of Pluto, emissaries, agents, or escapees from the underworld. So they are bringing light and differentiation into the frozen darkness of Pluto's domain. So they concern the wisdom of the dark places, which, now thinking of some of the things that Rick said, you know, it's to these places that we sometimes can only go once we've learned to be sufficiently present to ourselves. This is an amazing image. If you Google images, Pluto's heart of ice, that's what it's actually called. Photo taken by the Southwest Research Institute. And see the heart. So Pluto's heart of ice. I know that Pluto, of course, is an outer planet. So it's a transpersonal realm of experience and also collective. But it's also very deeply personal. I believe that about all the outer planet energies. They represent powerful internal states that most of the time we find it almost impossible to integrate or to process. And that's where the Centaurs come in. Some of the Centaurs, notably Chiron, move over the orbit of Saturn, so they're both inner and outer planets. So this theme of the heart of ice, there's a lot of interesting work currently being done about the relevance of trauma in the individual life process. And, you know, the phenomenon of post-traumatic stress disorder has only quite recently been recognized, whereas when you really think about it, it's obvious that some of the self-destructive and otherwise destructive behaviors that people, including you and me and everybody, get into is actually a reaction to trauma. And trauma is associated with shock, which is associated with a sense of freezing up. So in the Plutonic realm is stored all of the experience which we were not able to process fully at the time. And the Centaurs represent energies that open up those frozen areas so that we have maybe for the very first time access to that experience in a way that can bring healing. Just knowing about it, knowing about a trauma or just having a flashback doesn't necessarily move the healing process on, but Pluto and the centaurs really do. So this is just a comparison. Here is the orbital path of Chariklo, very similar to Pluto, to Chiron, in that she goes out almost to the orbital path of Uranus, but doesn't cross over it, stays outside the orbit of Saturn, whereas Chiron goes inside it. Chariklo's orbital period is 62 to 63 years. So this is an important little staging post after the second Saturn return. This is just for interest. I won't say a whole lot about it because you'll get it in the PDF. But there's a very bizarre kind of cycle between Chiron and Chariklo. So there's sometimes a gap of over 200 years before their conjunctions. And then sometimes you get a run of them, like in the early to middle 18th century. There were 3 in 1949, and there won't be another one until 2199. And in between, you get these huge runs of oppositions, sometimes over 30 of them, taking about 45 years. So that would qualify as a generational aspect, which I'm still researching, but a very interesting orbit. Here is the discovery chart of Chariklo. I wrote at some length in the article for the OPA magazine. Just want to point out a few things. Now, there is Chariklo. Oh, I've also added in a couple of other centaurs to this chart. I won't say anything about them because that would be a whole other talk. But the most incredible chart. So there's Chariklo at 604 of Leo. And she completes this incredible 6-pointed star here. So without Chariklo, the star is not complete. And if you look at the accuracy of this star, it is mind-blowing. Look, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. All, I mean, it's so exact, it's almost absurd. It was also shortly before, like a few hours before, an exact conjunction of Uranus and Jupiter in early Aquarius. And what we also notice, what features in the chart, is there are 2 singletons, meaning a planet occupying, the only planet occupying one of the elements. In this case, it's water and earth. So we have Chiron. No, she's the wife of Chiron. So there's Chiron in Scorpio and Neptune in Capricorn. So it occurs to me that's like the power of the healing waters, Chiron in Scorpio. And Neptune in Capricorn is the cognition of the sacredness of the earth. We also see the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction has Mercury just tagging on. So it's actually part of that 6-pointed star. It's not as spectacularly exact as the other ones, but that rules, Mercury rules both of the angles, ascendant and midheaven. So a fascinating chart. Now, I want to just go through the qualities that Chariklo represents. And what's interesting is that there's only very little information to go on in the mythology around Chariklo. If we look at, the usual sources of Greek mythology, and I'm still researching this. She did start her life as a nymph, and she somehow became a centaur. I don't know exactly how. Perhaps she followed Chiron into a different realm, but at any rate, she was his wife. And I did begin researching her as soon as she was discovered. And I saw a few things. And I did think to myself, well, according to some of the classic sources, Chiron lived for almost a millennium in a condition of great suffering, having sustained a wound accidentally bestowed by Hercules. And he couldn't cure the wound in spite of his own gifts as a healer, and neither could he die of the wound because he was a demigod. So he lived for almost a millennium in this condition of eternal suffering. So I thought to myself, well, who was looking after him all this time? It must have been his wife. Okay, so they lived in a cave on Mount Pelion, it's said. So I already had the association with some kind of invisible spirit of caring, nourishing, and healing. I then had a very powerful experience in a session with a client where I suddenly saw that her life was embodying this archetype. And sure enough, when I checked out where it was in her chart, it absolutely described her situation. I then got curious to see, well, okay, where is it now? And I then saw she was about to make a conjunction with Pluto. So I began to just add Chariklo to all the horoscopes of all the clients I was seeing. And it was pretty spectacular, I have to say. These are the themes that came out of that preliminary research. So that's about 18 months that I've been researching through, you know, and big gratitude to all my clients. So what we can see with Chariklo is there is this quality of invisibility. And, you know, that's shared with Pluto, because remember, he never came above ground without this helmet that rendered him invisible. And the underworld, anyway, is like a realm of invisibility. So with Chariklo, there is this invisible but very, very powerful capacity to hold the space and to be of service in a way that is invisible most of the time. So it's not done for ego or for glory, and it may be virtually unseen. So a particular quality of healing and caring. I found that this theme of the midwife to the dying and the living, this seems very powerful. All the clients I have who work professionally in those kinds of fields, or where life has simply brought them those kind of situations, they all have prominent Chariklo in their chart.
Yeah, Melanie.
Sorry, yes?
Just a quick question. And
yes.
Can you share where is Chariklo today?
Yes, that's my next my next slide's coming right up.
Okay, great.
So the this line here is what's really important, I think, for 2019. So the qualities that she offers are patience and a quality of abiding, bearing witness, enduring. It's also very stable energy. You know, astronomically, she's the most stable of all the centaurs known. And a modesty and a humility and a reserve. So being able to hold energy, hold the space. So very yin kind of energy. Here is the graph showing where the conjunctions occur. So this is 2019. At the moment, Chariklo is about 4 degrees off exact conjunction of Pluto. And you can see how she accompanies this whole period leading up to the Saturn-Pluto. There's just one conjunction of Chariklo and Saturn, and then, of course, later that goes on to other things. So here is where the sequence is now. I've put in the stations because around the time of a planetary station is a very good time to tune into the energy, because the slower a planet is moving, the more powerful its axis can be. So when a planet slows down to change direction, it's a brilliant time to contemplate, meditate, and really get a feel of the energy. So there's a list of dates for you here. And what's interesting is that the first of the conjunctions is 2 days before Chiron goes into Aries for the second ingress.
So a quick question again, Melanie. I don't want to take too much time because we're a bit tight with time. But did you notice any significant historical event when Chariklo was conjunct Chiron in, uniting the couple, basically? Was there anything that you could perceive meaningful?
Well, there were 3 of those conjunctions, and they were all in 1949. And there were a number of interesting things that happened historically and in the collective. So when that was building up, there are some countries that were formed in 1948-49 under this conjunction, and India and Israel are the 2 that come immediately to mind. And there's lots more too. I don't have that research to hand at the moment. But what I want to emphasize is this quality of Chariklo as the holder of space, the one who can perceive and bring clarity without reactivity. So it's a chart. Her chart is all this big, beautiful star, which is all in air and fire, but the 2 singletons are earth and water, and in an individual chart, the emphasis will get thrown onto the singleton, and I think that's the quality. So the earth and water, they are very holding kind of energies. So there's a very profound intelligence and intuition which is held by this earth and water. And when this came to me in this session, firstly, it was just like a total gift to the client and her particular concerns. And it really felt to me like something on offer from the planetary pantheon for all of us in 2019. This is the chart of the client. And you can see, and this is why she contacted me, because she knows enough astrology to have built up quite a bit of fear about the Saturn-Pluto. And I vividly remember when I was doing the final prep on the chart, there was an exact Moon-Uranus opposition in 3 and 9. And I remember literally praying at that moment, because I was aware of it. I was sitting there doing the final prep. And I prayed at that moment that some kind of clarity or help might come from somewhere, because I was aware I'd have to be very careful with my language, because I felt she was in the kind of state where no matter what I would say, it would increase her fear. And I didn't want to do that. So I prayed on the opposition of Moon-Uranus, and then this mind-blowing thing happened in the middle of the session. So there is her Chariklo, and here is a chart of the moment when the big aha happened. This was last year, and you can see that Pluto's right on her ascendant. This is another centaur called Pholus, and my tagline there is the lid comes off. So there was this boom that happened, and Chariklo was just behind Pluto and just coming up to the conjunction with Pholus. Lid comes off. Now, Pholus was a diviner and a seer, and also the storyteller of the gods. So I told her the story of Chariklo. We can also see Chiron and Venus here on the south node.
Would you?
There's the Moon-Uranus opposition that was exact when I was doing the prep.
Would you say that Chariklo conjunct Pluto during this next cycle can bring healing to the intensity of the Pluto-Saturn conjunction?
Yes, what I saw was, given that she is involved in the prelude to the Pluto-Saturn conjunction with the 3 conjunctions, And then you saw on the graph how she weaves right in with the conjunction. And then for the whole of 2020 as well, very, very closely conjunct Saturn. There's only one exact conjunction, that's in February of 2020. But the whole way through the year, that energy's there. So it seemed to me, wow, it felt to me like something of a key. Her energy and her qualities. And amazing, you know, and appearing, as it were, at least to me, in this lead-up time. Because obviously, well, for those of us old enough to remember, this lead-up time now corresponds to 1981 and 1982. So well worth checking back, because if there are fragments of our own personal experience that got frozen back there with the intensity, the chances are that they will be released and they will open up the healing. So the frozen parts will thaw. That's how these centaurs seem to work.
So you're speaking of 81, 82 because that was the previous Saturn-Pluto conjunction?
Exactly, exactly. And then anyone who has it in their horoscope, born between 1940, 46, 47, and 48, 49, that was the previous Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Leo. And in a sense, well, people who've got Saturn and Pluto in hard aspect on their charts anyway are kind of primed with the kind of energy that helps to ride the intensity of this. And it just seemed to me like Chariklo brought in this extra dimension, being able to hold, you know, like when we're totally surrounded by total chaos and mayhem. It's this energy that represents that which in us, which can hold the space, hold firm, abide with, be present, all of which is totally invisible. So this is not necessarily an energy indicating doing. Could be activity to do with service or helping or whatever, but it's the power of it is at the level of being. That's the essence of it.
Thank you so much. This is really food for thought and for further observation and research.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Melanie.
Thank you, thank you.
And it definitely adds, such a mysterious element to this quite intense configuration.
Yeah, that's what I felt. And I know it's true that whatever you focus on, you see. Okay. So after I had this experience with this client, who generously gave me the permission to share her chart and share her story and everything, I began, just out of sheer curiosity, putting it into the chart of every single client that I saw since that date. And I couldn't believe my eyes, because honestly, 9 times out of 10, Chariklo was really prominent natally or by transit. And also 9 times out of 10, that energy and its qualities seemed to exactly address something that person needed to speak about or needed to hear. It's just been very thrilling.
What we will do, I know in your article that is going to be published in the next edition of the Career Astrologer, you've also provided a link to the ephemeris of Chariklo so people can track it.
Thank you, Maurice, for remembering that. I was intending to say that, but I forgot. So thank you very much for bringing that in. Yes, there is an ephemeris of a few centaurs, and I think plus Pluto, but anyway, a few centaurs. It's actually also on my website, but the link in the article will probably be quicker, otherwise to dig through my website.
Great. So everyone is informed now. So we look forward to this publication coming at the solstice, and would like to thank again Melanie. Wonderful point of view.
Thank you.
And now we would like to introduce Roy Gillett, who is the president of the Astrology Association of Great Britain and has worked with OPA on many occasions, always sharing only, the importance of the mundane perspective from both political, social point of view, but also how we personally can interact and understand these larger cycles, because Roy always brings this aspect of self-awareness and compassion into the picture. So it was important for us to actually close with Roy to understand this global perspective. Thank you, Roy, for joining us.
Hello, thank you. Right, so I think it's all happening. Do I just share? I think that's probably the easiest way.
Yeah.
Where is share? What happened there? It wants me to upgrade or something. Start share. Kai, can you see what I'm doing? You see my screen now? It's going on about me. Oh, here we go. Is that okay? Can anybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Great, good. So where are we gone from? Current slide. Oh, the actual control mechanism's got in the way. There you go. Slideshow from the beginning. Well, this is going to be an incredible contrast from the depth and spiritual inspiration of Melanie's talk, but I think it's also a part of the complementary process, and at the heart of it, although it's going to deal quite a lot with economics, it's economics to do with our sort of ethical vision and our principles, which I think have got really screwed up and have really, made a problem with the world at the moment. And I think we can see the astrological reasons for this happening. And I'm going to try and put this into a very massive perspective. So first of all, let's put this little tool mechanism out of the way. Hopefully that will be out of the way there. Putting this year in its historical context. Right, so when was the last time that Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto were in Capricorn and Uranus was in Taurus? Using solar fire, you can search from 499 BCE to 499 CE, in other words, 10,000 years. And here, this very simple table shows you the times when that has happened in the past and when it's likely to happen in the future. And you can see that there's this amazing gap between 3,838 BCE and December this coming year, that these planets have not been in these signs at the same time. And when you look back to that time and study, you see it's right at the end of the Stone Age, the beginning of the Bronze Age, the beginning of the time when we first started having evidence or discovering evidence of writing. So we compare the people of the Stone Age. If you think about the people of the Stone Age, I don't know where I'm going. Can you see this toolbar that I'm moving around, folks? Maurice, can you see the toolbar? I think it's all right.
We can see the text.
It's all right. It's okay. I've moved it right out of the way now. So if you can compare the Stone Age people and how they were experiencing that time, all those years, those thousands of years ago, and then the coming of metal to a civilization that was based on stone and what you could do with stone. And then you compare us in 2018 to 20 at this crucial time in another kind of revolution, an electronic revolution, the industrial revolution, that's been building for the last 500 years, but particularly in recent times. And really, I would argue that 2018 to 20 is what I say, the banging our head against the brick wall end game of an economic and social system well past its sell-by date. And I want to look at the implications of that as we go through. So, first of all, some key events of Pluto in Capricorn periods from ancient times. And I'm looking at this from both the sidereal and tropical zodiac. If you want to know more about this study, you can either look at in more depth at the IVC talk I gave in earlier this year, or the talk I gave at UAC, particularly the talk I gave at UAC from the economic point of view. The Trojan War happened on a Pluto transit. The building of the Temple of Solomon was finished, and Solomon himself died during a Pluto transit. The Upanishads in India and the Greek theology by Hesiod were written 700 BC to Pluto transit. The Greek Parthenon was constructed during the next transit, and Christianity was legalized in Rome, and the Council of Nicaea happened, all in a Pluto transit. So these are crucial events that have formed the kind of society we live in.
You're talking about a Pluto in Capricorn transit.
Pluto in Capricorn, yeah. That's all I'm talking about there, but I'm going to come to the others in a moment. Now, the last two Pluto in Capricorn periods, people have started talking about this. The Reformation, Luther's nailing these dissertations on the church wall, happened very soon after Pluto's ingress into tropically into Capricorn. The dissolution of the monasteries in England, the first navigation of the world, the development of trade in the Far East, the expansion of Islam into Eastern Europe, India, and further east, and Copernicus' on Revolution of Heavenly Bodies was published on the day he died, or just after he died. The next Pluto in Capricorn transit occurred when the development of that initial phase in the previous transit, rapid expansion of colonialism, industrialization, leading to a radical upheaval in the way the world and societies within nations did business with each other. And this was really a time when European nations, led by Britain, mapped and recorded the world. Captain Cook is a very well-known figure who mapped Northern America, parts of the Northern American coast, as well as Australia and New Zealand. And it was almost as if our 18th, 19th century doomsday book of assets to exploit was being created. And out of all this comes today's capitalism, and the struggle for democracy was born. Now, I'm now jumping ahead and looking a little bit of financial astrology, because if we have more time, I could go into why I think that the nature of capitalism and the astrology charts that show it. I would particularly recommend you look at the chart for the Bank of England that's in my talk, A New Vision of Capitalism, which I gave at UAC, but also the chart for the Federal Reserve, the US Federal Reserve. Both are descriptions, they're charts of classic gambling enterprises, which is the essential foundation of the way we do business with each other at the moment, and have done ever since the development of the colonial period in the previous but one Pluto transit through Capricorn. And I just mentioned that there. Have a look at those charts. Because of this, when you get strong concentrations of Earth energy, nearly always you get some kind of realization, confrontation with reality. Earth stelliums tend to indicate economic realism, the ending of booms. And this is a chart for the Dow. And you can see that was the end of the 1929, the concentration of Earth energy, all those brown planets, mainly in Capricorn. Again, in 1937, the end of that peak then, that recovery then. Quite a lot of Earth planets, all brown planets in Virgo, Capricorn, and Taurus as well. In 1966, the end of a post-war recovery with the markets moving sideways for about 15 years. Again, a concentration of Earth energy. We then come to May 2000, and that's a classic, wonderful example of the movement of the concentration of Earth energy, with all those planets in Taurus square to Uranus in Aquarius, the dot-com bubble coming to an end. And again, in 2008, just as Pluto was about to go into, well, it's just in Capricorn, and the other concentrations of Earth energy with Jupiter and Saturn in Earth, you get the 2008 collapse that year. And now coming up, as we come to, I've got here January the 5th, 2020, is this tremendous concentration of planets in Capricorn, including the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, all in that sign, and also Uranus in Taurus, and the inner planets, of course, there as well. So we've got this situation where Capricorn-driven Earth stelliums between 2017 and 20, and the sidereally 21, are the most powerful for 100 years. And this indicates more than another correction, rather a radical change in the very foundation of capitalism as it's developed over the past 500 years. And I would argue even more than that, going back to the first slide I showed you. Now, having said all that, financial astrology can be unreliable, as can all astrological predictions, because it's a combination of cycles. So certain patterns may work for a while, but because of other factors, astrological factors, not then work. Now, what we've got here is a chart for the moments when Mars moved into retrograde motion. And people who were doing financial astrology in the 80s and early 90s were noticing that every time Mars moved into retrograde motion, I'm pointing it out there, the markets tended to go sideways or go downwards. And so when we come to this moment in January 1995, where Mars was in that position, I've just put the extra line in to emphasize it, it seemed as if the market should go sideways again, but it didn't. Why didn't it? Well, because Pluto was about to move into Sagittarius, Jupiter already moved into Sagittarius, and Mars was about to move backwards into Leo, which is the gambling sign of the zodiac, as well as being the fifth house. So we get this situation where another cycle overrated, Mars returns back, hence the largest rise in history, until we got this Taurus Uranus square that I was talking about in the previous slide in 2000. And then another issue comes in. So it's this constant interaction struggle between cycles that determines what's happened. Now, this is very relevant to what we're now going to talk about, which is the present time. Let's just go on with that. So as well as Earth stelliums then, 2019 is dominated by Jupiter in Sagittarius, square to Neptune in Pisces. And Jupiter rules both signs, and Neptune rules Pisces, of course. So you think this is a wonderful time, you know, when all this auspiciousness is happening. And these are the dates that I've given you. And if you don't get a chance to note them all down, I do encourage you to look at them in the recording of this talk. But rulerships do not necessarily mean positive outcomes. Rather, they're about the effective use of the energy. The energy works well, but it might not work beneficially. So 2019 could see us in a life or death struggle to cope with an outdated economic system that will become increasingly futile. And if you analyze what's going on in the world at the moment, this is exactly the root of cause of our problem. The argument over Brexit, the Trump argument in America, all the struggles throughout Europe, is all about money and wealth and who's got and who hasn't got, and we want more and we've got to defend ourselves against it. And so, it's very good at struggling. So with the Earth pressure too great this time, I suspect that Jupiter's Capricorn ingress will either see the world tertiary on the world edge of disaster, or, wait for it, or something I thought more positive than that. Wait a minute, or ready for radical change. And this is really the point I'm coming to, what Melanie was trying to say and what others have tried to say, that this doesn't necessarily mean doom, although we do stand on the edge of it. Now, there's a couple of factors to add into this. There's a solar eclipse on the 26th of December 2019. And I want you to focus on where this happens. The actual point where it's directly overhead is Kuala Lumpur, which is one of the main economic centers of Asia. And Asia has been keeping the whole world going economically ever since the 2008 crash. So that in itself is quite significant. From a more spiritual point of view, in a way, although still economic, 6 months later, there's another solar eclipse that's focused more centrally on China, but still in Asia and going across to Africa. Now, what's particularly interesting, now I thought, well, where's the main point of that? And what I noticed was it's in a place called Mount Kailash. Now, I don't know how many of you know about Mount Kailash, but it is a major spiritual center in Tibetan Buddhism. It's a place of pilgrimage. It's incredibly sacred. And it's from that area of the world where all the great rivers are drawn that go into China and Pakistan and India. It's an incredible spiritual center. And so this could be a time of incredible learning and transformation. I think these two eclipses between December at the end of next year and June 2020 will be particularly significant. So these are the astrological factors we face up to. I've worked out some ideas on how we can avert disaster in the face of all this. And this is where the economic facts, which are driving our whole spiritual being, is almost being dominated. We're told we have to expand and be greedy in order to think. Our problem is our economics is based on growth and greed. To keep it going, we constantly extend our debt, increasingly use up resources, increasingly sell the future. And with the information technology, it sort of gives us all power, but it also traps us in its dispassionate and inflexible systems, and so can easily return power to those who control us. We become victims of soulless artificial intelligence machine, the mixed blessing of the cloud. And I always think that as more and more people have all their stuff on the cloud, it will only take a few plugs to be unplugged for us all to lose all our information. This seems to be very worrying. Also, the whole development of voice technology in computers. Very soon, the generation, my little granddaughter is only 2-3 years old, she can just talk into the machine. She doesn't even need to know how to tap some words. She can ask for what she wants and it will come to her. But that gap between control over our world and our world controlling us is a major factor that we need to have a more advanced system of values to cope with. And so at the moment, the initial phase of this has been that globalization has created a global village, but it lacks a value system. It's giving power to the disruptors and allowing fewer and fewer people to gain more and more of the world's wealth at the expense of everyone else. So we want to avoid this leading to disaster, we need plutonic change. And the first step to realize this is what I was hinting at earlier, that monetarism is a simplistic, highly inadequate foundation for today's world economy because it disregards the way money is obtained and the consequences. Growth without consolidation is unsustainable. Because we tend to talk all the time about gross domestic product and stock market prices and ignore how that growth was secured. And it often counterproductively leads to economic failure, as well as ignoring, this is critical, the social and economic problems it creates. So I've got two crosses there. For manipulation of shares, commodities, it's no good. For even producing things we don't need. People don't seem to realize this when they talk about whether the economy is going well or not. The only real growth that's worth having is growth that comes from the production and sale of goods and services that have lasting value. And there's two books that are not astrology books that were really heartening, because I'm going to mention at the end a book that I've written about this. And I wrote it before I saw either of these books. And these are two economists, two brilliant economists, who are showing exactly what's wrong with the world economy at the moment from an economic point of view. And they're confirming the astrology. And one's called The Value of Everything. If you just type that into a search engine, you'll get the book in the books. Mariana Mazzucato, and the other one, The Econocracy, and that's two students who started economic studies 2008 and found that the professors who didn't understand what had happened in 2008 continued to teach the same system. And both of these are revolutionary. So the answer lies beyond economics in our fundamental values. And I see the Me Too movement as a crucial clue in all this. The social policy that has been dominated by male chauvinist objectification of women, the celebration of brute competition and conflict within societies and ultimately war. This is so familiar that we're convinced, especially by our leaders, it's the only way. There is a better way, and that is to realise that enterprises based on cooperation are the truly efficient ones. This need not undermine free enterprise, it could enhance it. We should let our birth charts reveal the genuine expression of our many male-female forms. I always feel when people tell me, oh, they've discovered the 32nd sexual type. You know, on the internet, you can go and you can find all sorts of sexual definition and sexual identities. And I think, well, I've been looking at sexual varieties in astrology charts for 40 years. And every bit of femininity in me should be valued, and every bit of masculinity in me should be valued. And we are all different sexual beings. And, you know, this is where astrology has so much to say for the future. We have to let social and world affairs be based on respect and the celebration of differences. Goodwill is needed to change radically our economic, legal, educational, political and media systems. So suddenly the idea of facing up to the economic reality of a system that isn't suited for the modern world enables us to actually change all the values and create a better world. A system based on respect and kind cooperation is not just idealistic, it's also the only way to true economic efficiency. And I'm just gonna show you a couple of things, if you don't mind, that I've prepared to argue this case more fully. Quite simply to say, put kindness first. And the book I wrote after the 2008 crisis, 2000 Economy, Ecology and Kindness, I wrote a sequel to that, Reversing the Race to Global Destruction. And in trying to get this idea across, we need a new paradigm. I'm not talking about growth and expansion and success all the time, but talking more about the values of kindness. And so I've made 3 YouTube little short things. The first one, Kindness First, does a job on the presidential inaugural address in 2017. And then there's this poem I wrote, the Anthem of Love, has a prologue which has got the things we need to avoid and a main poem that just talks about the way of celebrating everything that's good in our world. And then the shorter one, the Anthem of Love poem, just has the positive. So I just feel that the astrology of the present and future is incredibly frightening, incredibly dangerous, and could lead to horrible things. But if we change our paradigm, if we change our mind, if we learn our lessons, if we get into healing, then we well might change the world for the better in these years that lie ahead.
Thank you so much.
That's a bit of a diatribe, I'm afraid, but that's what
No, that's important. I mean, we need these references because these are really powerful and strong currents, which, like you say, could lead to the drowning, or could lead to some kind of breakthrough. Now, the one thing I'd like to ask you, particularly with reference to Uranus moving into Taurus, and you speak a lot about the financial systems and the need to transform, and many people, you know, we're focusing on the blockchain technology and Bitcoin kind of be part of this new paradigm of changing the financial structure, and yet at the same time it ended up, you know, also revealed as some kind of speculative and really earthless system that, at least at the point where it stands now, doesn't seem very reliable, even though it is kind of a new paradigm in the world of economy. But do you see a future to this new technology? And like you say, one last question tying to that and to something you say, we're moving so much, to the cyber world, and this blockchain technology takes all the financial, the financial dealings on a virtual reality, and we are losing touch with the kids don't learn to write anymore. They just speak.
They don't even learn to type. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, what do you think could happen on a very practical level?
Okay, well, let's just take first of all this Bitcoin thing, which I always thought was a bit of an illusion. It's just another way of doing business. It's amazing that when it first went on the Chicago Board of Trade and was traded out there, it led to immediate speculation, then a drop, and then sort of volatility all over the place. And that's exactly what happens to anything that's based on greed. That's why I'm so emphasizing that greed and growth is not the solution to our problems. Just about every politician tells you it is. And, Mr. Trump is amazing. The stock market's gone up, how successful am I? And we know that the stock market, if you, for example, do quantitative easing and government gives money to banks and they go and buy stocks and shares goes up, it seems like magic, that we've all got lots of money, but we haven't. It's based on illusion, which will crash down. So obviously we need a paradigm that cuts through, which has got a completely new attitude to why we do our living. Now, my experience, and I've been around a bit in different countries and different communities, that when communities work together in respect and devotion, they're much more efficient. And when we bring in original, different things and incorporate it into our activities, we are much wiser and much stronger. We make much more friends. Every time we put up a barrier, we make enemies who might want to knock down the barrier. Therefore, we have to spend more and more money on things we don't need, And there's been so many examples in the news over recent months of people who are trying to argue and not coming to any conclusion because their argument is about selfishness. So that is the problem. First of all, we've got to solve that. Now, in trying to solve it, I jump forward to the 24th century and Star Trek. Now, Star Trek, in a way, it's fascinating because except for teleportation, just about everything in Star Trek has been brought into being in the 21st century. And one of the things they had there was this massive computer that knew everything pretty well. And yet somehow, although everything was known about everyone pretty well, the system was without money. Things were provided without as was needed, and although they went to faraway spaces in space and fought horrible people, the central core of the society, the world society, was very benign. And I think that is because the values of that society were cooperative and kind, and based on kindness and cooperation, support for each other. And so what the answer to your question, I think, quite simply is that if we develop those kind of attitudes, then our tools we'll be the master of our tools and the beneficiary of our tools. If we continue to worry about greed and exploitation and using these advanced techniques, we will be in hell because we're going to constantly be at the mercy of the people who control the centers of the systems. And that's why I mentioned the cloud and all these people who have very small memories in their hard drives and rely on the cloud. This is a very dangerous situation because we're dependent on the people who control the cloud.
Yes, and that's I think also part of the awakening that you're talking about, to understand the gap between the material world and the values, the emotional and the spiritual, maybe relating to Neptune being in Pisces, bringing that more global, compassionate perspective, to Uranus in Taurus, and Pluto in Capricorn even, to actually create systems that benefit the whole and benefit the common people, not just the few who understand the system. So maybe...
I mean, bear in mind that in the 1930s you had Pluto in its opposite sign of
Cancer,
and Neptune in its opposite sign of Virgo. we've now got the planets in the right positions in a way, and it's really up to us. And as I said, was saying with the Jupiter-Neptune square, the Jupiter-Neptune square could be horrible. It could be just fighting against the impossible until we finally collapse at the end of the year. Or it could be realizing that we do have to deal with the fact that a lot of refugees want to move into countries and settle, that we do have to give way certain things to other people, that we can't control the whole destiny, that if we don't want people to starve to death in Yemen, we don't have to make arms to sell there because a few people get unemployed. I mean, these are decisions we have to learn to make. And if we do start doing it that way, then the world start healing. But of course, because it's Jupiter squared Neptune, it's painful to accept the right answer, but it isn't once you accept it.
Absolutely. And that's, part of what I was referring to Neptune, as much as it relates to illusions, it's basically after you pierce through these veils, you actually see a very powerful truth behind it. Mm. And thank you, everyone. I think, this is a wonderful, multifaceted perspective on what's coming up. And I appreciate very much, how each one of you really emphasize a different aspect of these influences, the practical and the spiritual, and realizing that I think this is a very powerful discussion because these are really critical times, and it seems like many of you are mentioning we're ready for something to really shift, for this earthquake to occur, because the change seems inevitable. The question is, what kind of change? Is it kind of a scorched earth policy, or is there a way to more progressively lead to something that would serve us all?
Yeah.
So astrology is a wonderful tool that help us, prevent. It's kind of a preventive medicine tool, and we can only hope that, at least if we do our share, something can shift. And I believe that everyone, even if they're not conscious of astrology, is now having this kind of conversation, because it is not sustainable the way it is.
Maurice, can I just ask something? These words in blue underneath each of the pictures, they're the search you have to type to get there. If you just type that in any Google search, of Roy Gillett Kindness First or whatever it says there, then you will get to see those videos if you want to see them. They're not very long. But it's just an attempt to change the paradigm, the way people think. And if you agree with me, then spread it around. Okay.
Wonderful. And I'll just share our...
Do you want me to take off my screen now? Yeah, go.
Okay. So this is our next career astrologer. Most of these insights will be published in print or online through our next edition. I would like to thank all of you, and I would like to mention Faye Senner, who is the designer of the cover, even though this is not the final cover. It does capture the essence of our next edition. So thank you, Rick, Melanie, Angela, and Roy, and God bless everyone. God bless the earth and all of us for this new year. Merry Christmas, everyone. Mm-hmm. And remember the original spirit of Christmas. Remember the fact that the sun in the northern hemisphere is returning to the light. So bear that in mind and open your hearts. Thank you all.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you, everyone. And happy solstice and happy full moon.
Absolutely. So thank you. Is Jeff with us? Jeff, can you close this? And yes. We will leave the meeting and we will share the recording. Just keep in mind, everyone, that there is another presentation by Cassandra Tyndall who will be added to the recording. So let's keep her in the loop. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks for listening, everyone.